10 Quick Tips for a Psilocybin Trip. A Takeoff, Landing, and Integration Guide by Kyle Woodruff. Read for you by Dallin Bradford. Preface. After graduating from college in the late 2000s, I went through a phase of reading all kinds of material on religion, philosophy, and self-help in an attempt to understand and improve my mental health. I stumbled upon The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley while scouring through various texts. This was my first exposure to the world of psychedelics, and I was immediately intrigued. Since then, I've experimented with a variety of doses and protocols and have gone down a rabbit hole of self-discovery and healing that I never could have experienced without the aid of these substances. With this guide, I hope to assist anyone new to the world of psychedelics in developing the initial foundation of knowledge and tips I wish I had when starting out, to ensure the best initial experiences possible. Tip number 1. Legality and means of acquiring. I put these topics first because it would be a bit difficult to go on a psychedelic journey without a source of psychedelics now, wouldn't it? But right off the bat, you should consider the legal implications of what you're pursuing. Just because you think something shouldn't be illegal doesn't mean it isn't. Despite the fact that psychedelics were dubbed drugs with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, categorized as the most dangerous drugs of all, with potentially severe psychological or physical dependence, and the laws around them were enacted in a time when audiocassettes were revolutionary, birth control was not yet legal, and Jim Crow laws were still standing, the fact remains that psychedelics are considered a Schedule I drug at the federal level. I don't say this to scare you, I just want to make sure that you're aware. Plus, it's wise for me to preface with an obligatory disclaimer that I would never, in writing, encourage the utilization of substances where they are unlawful. However, I can simultaneously acknowledge that illicit self-medication happens from time to time and feel that access to a quick tip guide is imperative for individual harm reduction as well as public safety. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about how psychedelics have come a long way in terms of becoming far less taboo than they were when I started using them 10 or so years ago. Exciting research has resumed since the hysterical reaction of the war on drugs in the 70s, before which the study of psychedelics was taken seriously by the field of psychology. Research began in the 50s, extended into the 60s, and even continued in hiding throughout the years until recently, when it resurfaced once more in universities like Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, and elsewhere. Since 2018, a slowly growing number of cities across the U.S. have decriminalized psychedelic plants to varying degrees, and Oregon, Colorado, and New Mexico have even gone as far as to push the legal status of some of these substances statewide for medical use, opening up facilities in which the public can seek treatment. Not everyone has access to these facilities, however, and there is still a population seeking psychedelics in the underground, which might include you. Therefore, and this should go without saying, it's of massive importance for your safety that you find a trusted source. If you can't, don't do it. Just be patient and put the message out into the universe that you're seeking an experience, and trust that the right source will come to you at the right time. I was interested in psychedelics for 2 years before the right opportunity surfaced. And because I was patient, the timing was ideal, and my first experience couldn't have been better. Back when I first started smoking weed as a college student in the late 2000s, marijuana wasn't as culturally accepted as it is today. There weren't any dispensaries to go to. It wasn't even decriminalized, never mind legal. My point in telling you this is that my friends and I had to endure a large number of sketchy situations in order to get our fix, and to be honest, we're lucky we never got anything laced with some other chemical. Granted, flowers aren't as easily tampered with as some mysterious white powder or pill like cocaine, ecstasy, or other drugs, but the mentality remains the same. In the same way, there are certain forms of psychedelics that are probably more easily identifiable than others. If you're given a baggie of what looks like dried, shriveled mushrooms, there's a good chance they're dried, shriveled mushrooms. If it looks like a bag full of mysterious white powder, there's a good chance it is a bag of mysterious white powder containing who the hell knows what. The point I'm reiterating is that if you can't find a pure form from a source you trust, wait. The number of people who die because they indulged in a substance handed to them at a party or from some random dealer isn't a statistic you want to become. In the early days, I was at the mercy of when psychedelics found me. Later, after doing some research, I learned you could order spores online, legally, for scientific observation under a microscope only, of course, and grow mushrooms on your own. There are still legal restrictions involved with purchasing, growing, or possessing mushrooms that vary across different states and countries, and in no way, shape, or form is the author advocating for the growth, consumption, or possession of illegal substances. I'm just telling you what I did myself, and I would caution you to learn about the specific laws around doing so in the area where you live, if this is a route you plan to go. Personally, I've never gone the route of foraging wild psilocybin mushrooms, as the risk of misidentification can put you in the ER. So if this is a route you plan to adventure down, I would proceed with extreme caution and seek guidance from an experienced forager who knows a lot about identification first. Tip number 2. Dosage and forms of consumption. Let's say you have found a trusted source. Now what? What's available? Can you get fresh mushrooms, dried, chocolates, tinctures, microdose capsules? Should you try all of these? What effects will they have? How much should you try? What are you trying to accomplish? When should you do it? Do you have anything to do the next day? How functional do you need to be in the environment where you'll be consuming these things? These are all questions pertaining to dosage that should be swirling around your head right now, and here I hope to help you answer at least some of them. I've journeyed with psilocybin mushrooms countless times using various doses. What's most commonly available seems to be dehydrated whole mushrooms. My go-to form of consumption is often to use a coffee grinder or blender to turn dried mushrooms into a powder, then swirl a weighed amount of this powder into warm water with honey to make a tea. I've also taken countless doses in capsule form, as well as chewed down fresh or dried specimens on their own. The dosage that appears to lead to the most pronounced therapeutic outcomes in clinical settings is in the range of 25 to 30 milligrams of psilocybin. Note that within the studies where these measurements come from, subjects aren't consuming mushroom specimens, but rather synthetic psilocybin in isolation. This is much easier to measure out and control. Unless you're the selected subject of clinical trials, or you've got access to a laboratory and the know-how to isolate this compound yourself, however, you likely won't have access to pure synthetic psilocybin. Most of us are lucky to get our hands on mushrooms in mushroom form, and mushrooms are often referred to in grams. I bring this up to share that the average concentration of psilocybin in most species of psilocybin-containing mushrooms is around 1%. That means that for every 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams of mushrooms, they will contain approximately 10 milligrams of psilocybin. To complete the math equation for you, this means that approximately 2.5 to 3 grams of mushrooms is the equivalent of what we're talking about here. Because we're dealing with mushrooms and not isolated psilocybin, however, something else to consider is the potential for varying potency within each batch of mushrooms. Different strains of psilocybin-containing mushrooms, different batches, the age of the mushrooms, and how they've been stored can all affect potency, not to mention your own weight, size, metabolism, and whether or not any other substances are in your system that might come into play. There are laboratories that have explored the range of psilocybin concentration in different mushroom strains, and that range can be anywhere from 0.5% all the way up to 2%. What that means is that someone might get a hold of 1 gram of mushrooms thinking they're taking 10 milligrams of psilocybin, when in fact they're only taking half that dose. Or on the flip side, someone could consume 1 gram of mushrooms thinking they're taking 10 milligrams of psilocybin, when in fact they're taking double. Obviously, sourcing is key, but until measured amounts of isolated psilocybin are available to the public legally, measuring out grams of mushrooms will continue to be a bit of a guessing game in terms of potency. That said, your best bet is to stick to the rule of thumb listed above, while remembering that you can always take more, but you can never take less. There's no shame in dipping your toe in the water with smaller doses and then working your way upward. I'll tell you, my very first trip was a rather large dose, and I briefly lost touch with whether or not the experience was some kind of dream or reality. I spent 2 years reading, researching, and listening to podcasts on the subject, and nothing prepared me for what actually occurred. I mention this to let you know that this is a possibility. That's why I repeat, you can always take more, but you can never take less. Regarding dried mushrooms, I've experimented with anywhere from 0.05 grams, which is subperceptible, up to 5 grams, where you start to question your perception of reality, and walls may start melting away, both literally and metaphorically. One such strategy is called microdosing, which can be understood as consuming 1/10 to 1/20 of a typical dose. The goal is not to endure the full-blown effects of a psychedelic trip, but to experience subperceptible benefits such as an elevated mood, increased focus, and a boost in creativity. I've experimented with this many times and would certainly suggest it to newcomers as a way to dip your toe in the entheogenic waters. I would also suggest caution in never underestimating even seemingly smaller doses beyond the microdose. "A gram of mushrooms can smack you," a friend of mine once said as we swapped stories of strong effects sneaking up on us. Weight doesn't always correspond with potency. Be patient is another word of caution I'd throw out there. Sometimes the effects of consuming psychedelics seem almost immediate, while other times it takes longer for the effects to come on than you anticipate. I once took 3 grams of mushrooms with a friend of mine, and we got impatient. "They must be old," were his famous last words before we took 2 more grams. Soon after that, I fell into a very deep and very intense well of despair. Eventually, I emerged, even better for it in the end. My friend, however, ended up altering his life drastically and permanently, proposing to his now wife over the phone. He's got kids and a white picket fence now. So I guess the cautionary tale here is that if you bite off more than you can chew, you might end up living happily ever after. Keep in mind that if you're consuming anything that hasn't been prepared by yourself or by someone you know, you're unsure of how many grams have been used. I learned this after consuming some mushroom chocolate squares and walking down a beach with friends toward live music we intended to see. We never made it because the mushrooms came on far harder than we anticipated, and a body buzz that left a public venue off the table forced us to plop our bottoms down in the sand to ride out the wave. We ended up watching the best sunset of our lives, diving into deep rabbit holes of conversation that turned out to be far more constructive than seeing music anyway, but that's a story for another time. I also think it's important to touch on the potential dangers of psychedelics, just briefly, as my aim isn't to cover any science or medical literature surrounding these substances here. In short, you'll struggle to find many reliably reported cases of people who have died from an overdose of psychedelics. The toxicity of psilocybin, for example, is quite low. From what I've read, it would require the consumption of around 3 to 4 pounds of dried mushrooms by the average human to reach the median lethal dose, or LD50, found in rats. Just for comparison purposes, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, and aspirin all have higher lethal doses, most of which have higher rates of hospitalization as well. In a tale of one of the highest doses I've ever heard of someone consuming, Paul Stamets tells a story about naively eating 20 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. He came out the other side completely fine, even better than before, ridding himself of a lifelong stutter. That said, I have read rumors of hospital trips or deaths associated with psychedelics, often in combination with other substances, but I'm not sure how much of it is accurate versus how much is potential propaganda drummed up for the war on drugs. I've also read about fatalities associated with misidentified mushrooms, where an individual plucked a poisonous look-alike from nature and died after eating it. But even those instances seem to be extremely uncommon. And of course, there is always the potential of buying sketchy drugs on the black market that are laced with some other dangerous poison, as mentioned above. So, proceeding with caution or avoiding that situation altogether would probably be wise. In most cases, though, 6 to 8 hours after consuming properly identified mushrooms, all physical effects are gone and the user returns to baseline, maybe with a few more insights on life than before. Tip number 3. Set. Unless you're brand new to the world of psychedelics, you'll know that I didn't come up with the phrase set and setting, but these are probably the most important things to focus on in order to have a good trip, after making sure you've got the proper dose of a pure substance, of course. Set, shortened from mindset, refers to the mental state a person has going into the experience. In other words, their thoughts, moods, intentions, and expectations. Setting refers to the physical and social environment, in other words, the time, place, and people who are around. While these things were originally observed by Al Hubbard while visiting mushroom ceremonies in Mexico, the term set and setting was later coined and spread by Timothy Leary in the early 1960s and eventually became widely accepted by researchers in psychedelic therapy. These two factors are highly influential over what kind of experience a user might have, both consciously and subconsciously. Anxiety or fear combined with a disagreeable environment may result in an unpleasant experience, while a relaxed state of mind in a safe and comfortable place is more likely to result in a better experience. Beginning with mindset and regarding thoughts and moods, some will advise against taking psychedelics unless you're in a good state of mind. But personally, I don't believe you must be in a happy-go-lucky state of bliss going into a trip. There are caveats, sure. If you're in such a state of despair in your life that you're already standing on the edge of a bridge debating whether or not to jump, it might not be an advisable time to consume 5 grams of mushrooms. Or if you find yourself in such a fit of rage after finding your spouse cheating on you that you've already got a gun in your hand, perhaps this isn't the ideal time to drop acid. But regarding more average, fluctuating ranges of emotions, happy, sad, angry, lonely, frustrated, down, I've taken psychedelics along the full spectrum. Oftentimes, I'm seeking guidance for why I'm feeling a certain way, and I usually come away with answers and clarity. I've taken psychedelics while in a great mood, and an hour later, I was in the fetal position confronting my darkest fears. I've taken psychedelics when furious and come out feeling relief with a totally new perspective on life. I once took a dose of mushrooms the day that a girlfriend and I split up and emerged realizing she was the archetypal epitome of the type of person I'd been subconsciously chasing. Your initial mood won't dictate what you feel throughout the 4 to 6 hours you're under the influence of mushrooms. This "you should only take psychedelics when you're in a good mood" precaution is a bit overplayed, in my opinion. Perhaps what I've just said about initial emotions is for the more advanced psychonauts, though. If this is your first time or one of your earlier journeys into the psychedelic realm, maybe it is better to try to center your emotions and go into the experience in a calmer state of mind. In that case, what to consider most before a trip regarding set is whether or not you feel comfortable and safe in the environment in which you might tap into a vulnerable state. We'll talk about your actual physical and social environments later, but first I want to touch on a few more things to prepare your mindset before a trip. If you have some kind of history with a workout, yoga, or meditation practice, perhaps pre-trip is a good time to utilize these things. Maybe you could even get a massage, or acupuncture, or take a hot bath. Maybe a walk in nature or journaling everything you've been feeling lately is best beforehand. Or maybe you have a lucky pair of underwear that will put you in the most physically and mentally comfortable state heading into your journey. Do whatever you think might help you relax before your trip, and you'll figure out what's best with trial and error. I've heard mention of cleaning the space in which you plan to trip beforehand so that a mountain of dirty dishes isn't staring you in the face and reminding you of what a slob you are. I've even heard of a woman who makes sure to do her makeup before tripping because she once looked in the mirror while on mushrooms without it and didn't like what she saw. I have my own thoughts about how you should deal with not liking what you see when you look in the mirror, and it doesn't involve avoiding your feelings and painting on a mask instead, but I'll spare you the lecture for now. I would, however, like to use this opportunity to segue into a quick note about mirrors. I've heard it recommended that you avoid them at all costs, else you'll go insane. But I've had rather interesting experiences with mirrors, and I've still got it together, relatively speaking anyway. For example, I once stared so deeply into my pupils that my face began to morph in my peripheral vision. My ears shrank or grew, my eyes scrunched or moved apart, my nose widened or narrowed, my hairline seeded or receded, and my eyebrows became thicker or thinner. All these different combinations made dozens of different faces. I didn't know if they represented people I've been, people I could have been, people that already existed, or people that will never exist at all, but in the end, I was still me. If you won't freak out about potentially morphing features, you might also use the mirror to get a good look at yourself, face or body, and observe any imperfections you might normally perceive. Reflect upon why you don't love them, and maybe come to terms with accepting them on a deeper level. So I leave the question of whether to mirror or not to mirror up to you. Tip number 4. Intentions and expectations. Intentions and expectations might be considered a subset of set, but I think they're important enough to deserve their own section. I didn't even discover that you could set intentions to dictate what your trip entailed until a few experiences into my psychedelic journey. A friend encouraged me to do it right before we took some LSD, and what occurred blew my mind. Before that, I just took the dose and went along for the ride. Very insightful things did surface, sure, but they were mostly triggered by conversations with other people or events unfolding in my environment. Some gems of wisdom or insights uncovered were perhaps what the entities or spirits you connect with while under the influence of these substances wanted to show me. These included observations about the outer world and insights pertaining to my inner world as well. You don't have to set intentions, of course. You can go in intentionless and see what happens, like a mystery grab bag of sorts. I've done it plenty of times, and often what's been on your mind lately and needs sorting out, whether you like it or not, will come up on its own. But I have often found setting intentions to be a helpful practice in creating some level of expectations and predictability, so I would at least encourage you to try it, just as my friend helped me unlock this powerful tool. In that first intention-setting experience, she told me, "Listen to this quote I wrote down from Rumi. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." I ran with that notion and jotted down, what baggage, like trust, jealousy, or parental issues, do I need to work through before I'm ready for love? And boy, did that dictate my entire journey, uncovering things I didn't even know were lurking under the surface as obstacles in the way of love. It also put my friend on a parallel path, and we underwent similar experiences and were able to support each other while unearthing similar traumas. After I saw how this worked, I often used intention setting to guide my trips. Here are some other examples of intentions I've set over the years, if you need some inspiration. How can I be the rock in the center of this cyclone of chaos that seems to be my life? Shed any limitations that will help me break through to the next level. Provide a clearer picture of my direction in life. Release all anger, guilt, and any other negative feelings that are holding me back right now. Rid me of the people pleaser and allow me to set boundaries. What patterns do I need to break through to become unstuck from my negative ways? Show me perspective on my higher purpose and connection to the universe. I've also set intentions around money, stage fright, insecurities, sex, and more. Setting intentions revealed the specific path I needed to walk in order to become the human I'm seeking to be. Something else I would encourage you to consider is journaling, or even recording voice memos during your trip, not just after or before. There are many insights that would have slipped away completely had I not written them down in the moment, or at the very least immediately after the trip and into the next day. It's also invaluable to go back over the course of a psychedelic career and reflect on intentions set and lessons learned in the past, some of which you'll need a reminder of to continue implementing as life goes on. As far as expectations go, I found the psychedelic journey to be very much akin to a roller coaster ride. The consumption of these substances is equivalent to strapping into the cart. Once you're committed, there is no stopping what's in motion. As this metaphorical train begins to inch forward, there are subtle yet important insights that slip into your mind if you listen carefully. These can be easily overlooked or brushed aside as non-psychedelic thoughts because you still feel very much sober. They are, however, an equally integral part of the journey, as the cart chugging along toward the ascent of the coaster's main climb. When you reach the base of the climb, this leg of the journey has often been associated with a slow build of euphoric feelings and an overwhelming sense of positivity, maybe even uncontrollable laughter. The peak of the coaster ride is a part of the experience that often includes a brief and teetering illusion, lasting just long enough to surmount the crest of the hill before the plunge into depths of inner turmoil. I found that psychedelics will show you a path of reality that you believe in the moment, or perhaps one you even hope will come true, only to contrast it sharply with your true emotions regarding a certain outcome or situation. The descent phase of the psychedelic coaster always seems to include either a series of unexpected twists and turns, a gut-wrenching loop-de-loop, or the kind of decrease in motor function that comes with jostling about at the mercy of centripetal forces beyond your control. During this phase, I found myself forced into a state of submission by these forces, sometimes unable to control my mind, my body, or even my soul. The tail end of the mushroom coaster ride tapers off with a decline in intensity until you've made your way back toward sober beginnings, a tad more shaken up and adrenaline-saturated than you were before. Depending on the ride, you may walk away thinking, well, that was certainly worth the wait in line. Or perhaps even, I'm never doing that again. Either way, there are still profoundly important insights to be observed in this phase of the ride as well. Along the way, you might have the most beautiful experience of your life, have the most terrifying experience of your life, find answers you were looking for, be left with more questions than answers, feel euphoric, feel nauseous, become hyper-focused, have impaired concentration, find peace, experience chaos, discover clarity, endure confusion, feel energized, deal with drowsiness, relive the past, gain insight into the future, feel more alive than you ever have, feel like you're dying, uncover unexpected sources of trauma, kick a habit or illuminate dependencies, break subconscious patterns, break generational patterns, sympathize with your parents despite their flaws, let go of tension or pain in your body, become a different person, embody someone else and see their perspectives, decide to move to a new place, end a current relationship, propose to your future wife, discover things about your sexuality, become celibate, find God. Be okay with feeling a bit nervous or intimidated before a trip. It's natural. Free yourself of any judgment of anything that comes up. Allow yourself to embrace any thoughts, feelings, or insights that arise during the experience. Don't fight or resist anything that seems to be coming through. Panic when physical sensations or uncomfortable thoughts seem to be over-exaggerated. Expect one trip to immediately solve a problem or cure lifelong depression. Know that it might take multiple experiences to really unearth what's going on if you're searching for something specific. I've been tripping for more than 10 years, and I still have unexpected things arise that improve my quality of life. Psychedelics might be a one-and-done experience for some, but it could be a lifelong process for others. Be patient with your own journey. Tip number 5. Setting. In terms of the physical environment you'll be in during your journey, you'll likely experience visual or auditory hallucinations under the influence of psychedelics. This should come as no surprise. It's been known for as long as these substances have been around, not to mention one of the primary reasons people take psychedelics to begin with. Walls might breathe, flowers might morph, or you might see faces in trees. Fracturing geometric shapes, melting, or morphing of your outer world can all occur. These effects have a draw for people seeking a highly unusual, eternal experience, and might even influence the way they see the world when they return to their baseline sobriety. Nature is a blessing to connect with while on psychedelics. I've had the experience of wandering amongst centuries-old trees, absorbing their perception of time, as well as meditating on the orchestra of New England insects at night, aligning with the pulse and rhythm of the universe. Sunshine and good weather are wonderful to have, though I once got caught in a passing rainstorm, and it washed away all of the doubts and anxieties I was experiencing at the time, forevermore understanding the meaning of some people feel the rain, others just get wet. A quick word of advice if you're going to trip outside. Be prepared to deal with any elements you might encounter, like weather, sun, or insects. A friend and I once moved from inside her apartment to out on the patio because soaking up some sun seemed appealing. After who knows how long, we realized she looked as red as a sun-dried tomato. Hypothermia and sunburns are still real in this state of mind. Listening to music can be transformative, enlightening, and extremely satisfying, offering a far deeper appreciation for the art form than you could ever have absorbed without psychedelics. It can also influence your journey with its sounds or lyrics, so take that into consideration when choosing your playlist. You may even come across an instance where a song comes on and you're not entirely sure whether you manifested that song with your thoughts or whether the song began influencing your thoughts before it came on, which is quite an experience to endure. Playing music while in this state of mind can also deepen your understanding of and relationship with an instrument, and dancing under the influence of psychedelics can deepen your understanding of and relationship with your body. I interacted with the outer world a fair amount during my early days of psychedelic experimentation, but after a certain point I turned more toward journeying alone in my bedroom with as little external stimulation as possible. Outer experiences and inner journeys each have their place, but if you choose to keep your eyes open, much of the thinking and focus of the journey is directed toward things outside of you. External stimuli can be wonderful, but keep in mind that they also have the potential to be distracting, derailing, and paranoia-inducing. So there is a potential for this double-edged sword to cut the wrong way. If the goal is to derive long-lasting benefit from a psychedelic journey in the therapeutic sense, keeping your eyes closed, perhaps using an eye mask or covering to limit the extent to which you're focusing on the outside world, allows you to go inward and focus more deeply on the thoughts and emotions that arise during the experience. This could be a key component in making the journey psychologically transformative. When it comes to music, some would argue that it plays a profound role in steering a trip toward being a positive experience. There's no denying that music has the power to change our mood even while sober, so it's with good reason that people employ this tactic. I'm of the belief, however, that just like with your eyes being open and the outer world being a visual distraction, having your ears filled with music can be an auditory distraction. If you choose to go this route, I would at least consider listening to something without lyrics. I've had a number of good experiences guided by the late and great George Winston's magical fingers on the piano, for example. But I found that silence allows the most pure and uninfluenced thoughts to pour through your subconscious mind. I'm not saying external and internal experiences can't both be impactful, but personally, I've become more comfortable with and prefer the latter as time has gone on, as inner exploration has become more of a priority than external exploration. When lying in the comfort of your own bed, in silence, you're free to swim the inner ocean of your mind and sort through anything bothering you without distractions. Psychedelics are like scuba diving gear that allow you to explore the iceberg that is your psyche. And if you do choose to lean toward a more inward journey, you won't regret the additions of intimate lighting, a bed, blankets, pillows, comfortable clothes, and a warm cup of tea. Maybe one or the other is what you find most beneficial, or maybe you can enjoy a best of both worlds scenario, where you trip in dark silence during the peak and then get out in nature during the come down. Whatever you choose, finding the right set and setting that works for you will likely be a trial and error process, so don't get discouraged if a trip isn't as perfect as you would have hoped. Most of the time, these experiences turn out to be exactly what you need anyway. Tip number 6. Tripping with others or in public. People you intend to trip around or with, and people you don't, will inevitably affect your trip. If you're tripping in public, be prepared to deal with the public. Fortunately, I never had any alarming experiences, or God forbid had to deal with the police, but those things could be a reality if you put yourself in certain circumstances. I have, however, had to deal with a very nice stranger who wanted to talk about the weather and his lunch, while a deep and philosophical train of thought had already left the station of my mind. His head and mustache were dancing in such wildly variable proportions as my thoughts were drifting elsewhere that it was a nightmare to keep a straight face without bursting out into laughter. But eventually he left, and things were fine again. In another public experience, my friend and I tripped while camping in the woods. Right as we peaked, while looking out over a vista, this couple came marching up the hill and stood beside us. They said nothing to each other as they put on a front of enjoying the scene, but their presence filled the air with an unsavory tension. It was clear they had been fighting, and their encroaching misery seeped into my veins. It spiraled my own experience into oblivion as I failed to bail their surly water out of my own sinking ship. In the end, it turned out fine, but I'm just making you aware that this sort of thing can happen. Energy is contagious, and your emotional shields are thinner in the psychedelic state than they are normally. Other people's moods can leak into your own much faster and deeper than usual, so be cautious about who you allow to enter your immediate sphere. I've had a blessed track record of only tripping with people who were cool, understanding, and supportive, as well as open and vulnerable with me. This might not always be the case if you find yourself among people who are not on the same wavelength. Poor attitudes and bad vibes have the potential to tank your state of being, so be cautious with whom you take psychedelics. If you're going to trip with others, I would only trip with people you trust enough to support you if you become vulnerable, and whom you love enough to support if they become vulnerable with you. The benefit of tripping with people you love and trust is that their familiar voice can help you out of despairing circumstances, offer you different perspectives on what you're working through, or simply provide a wildly different experience than enjoying their company sober or while consuming other substances. This can deepen a relationship between friends or lovers that might not have developed otherwise. I've participated in a number of social trips that were generally enjoyable and far different bonding experiences than any other circumstance we could have gone through otherwise. Tip number 7. Ceremonies, facilitators, or flying solo. While tripping in social circumstances can be enjoyable, it can also be a distraction from having a more inward journey. Conversations and lines of thought can be sidetracked, wants or desires may differ, and sometimes you have to cater to another's needs instead of immersing yourself in your own experience. Perhaps the appropriate metaphor would be playing a sport with others versus putting in the time to practice by yourself. The former can be fun or entertaining, and you might learn lessons about passing and teamwork, but practicing alone provides the opportunity for a deeper understanding of how to become a better individual player. So, let's talk about journeys with a more inward focus now, as they're a completely different experience than tripping with others. First, we'll cover group ceremonies, which aren't necessarily tripping alone, yet aren't driven by a social agenda either. These often take place with the intention of each person going inward, yet are done together in a group setting, where each person is lying down and immersed in their own world. The integration portion after the ceremony may be more social, but the deepest part of the experience is focused on the personal journey. Just know that in this environment, you might hear others sobbing, crying out in anguish, or vomiting as they process things, so be aware that this could influence your experience if you choose this route. If you don't think this would bother you, group ceremonies can offer a nice mix of the solo and social experience. Although the concept of psychedelic ceremonies dates back thousands of years, modern psychedelic retreats are still relatively new and only available in a handful of countries with more relaxed laws. Because of this, these retreats operate legally and can be one of the most comfortable ways to access psychedelics in a supportive environment, though they are a more expensive option that might not be feasible for all. You might be able to find more affordable, underground ceremonies in U.S. cities where psychedelics are decriminalized, but be aware that the hosts are still risking violation of federal laws. Many people do seek out a more authentic experience by traveling to, say, the rainforest of Central or South America and participating in ceremonies guided by shamans, but this experience can come with more risk if there are no regulations involved. There are plenty of cautionary tales of people going down to the jungle and being taken advantage of in some way or another, floating around the internet. I imagine that would be traumatizing in a sober state of mind, never mind the state of mind psychedelics can put you in. I'm sure there are reliable groups hosting these kinds of ceremonies, but it's worth vetting these groups thoroughly before rolling the dice. Also, keep in mind that lying out in a jungle in some foreign country with dancing, chanting, and instruments playing might be a lot to absorb in a psychedelic state. I'm not doubting this environment could be wonderfully beneficial for some, and I'm sure there's something to it being a practice that developed among ancient people over thousands of years, but it's something to consider if you're in the early stages of your psychedelic journey. Full disclosure, I haven't gone through this experience myself. I've thought about doing it at some point, but never felt truly called to pull the trigger. I once came close to going through with an ayahuasca opportunity that popped up the last time I was in Mexico, but the more my friends and I found out about the circumstances, 3 shamans we'd never met, facilitating a group of 40 strangers, providing no padding, blankets, or shelter out in the woods, not to mention I'd be on a plane flying to a work conference the next day, the opportunity didn't feel right. The point I'm making is don't be afraid to back out or avoid an opportunity if you're not 100% confident it's the right time. Do your homework when considering one of these types of ceremonies, and consider whether or not that type of environment is right for wherever you currently stand along your healing journey. While going through ceremonies with others can be powerful in many ways, the ideal psychedelic experience for some might be a solo journey with a sober babysitter, a person you trust to be loving and compassionate if needed, ideally with psychedelic experience themselves, so they at least roughly understand what you're going through. This sitter should know how to, and be comfortable with, potentially helping someone deal with a heightened state of anxiety in real time if the journey takes a turn down a challenging road. There may even be situations where the tripper feels like they're dying, exhibiting symptoms like difficulty breathing or vomiting. Someone who can aid in coaxing you into a calmer state, reminding you to breathe through it and that the experience is only temporary, can play an influential role in helping the overall course of the journey. This could be a friend or family member, of course, but there is also the concept of a more professional facilitator becoming more available. I mentioned places like Colorado and Oregon shifting their legality status and opening professional facilities for psychedelic therapy, training people to fit these roles. There seem to be both group options as well as one-on-one options available out there. If you find someone willing to facilitate your journey, I wouldn't suggest going into the experience without meeting them first, and perhaps talking to people they've facilitated to get their testimonials. A friend of mine recently found herself peer pressured into joining a psychedelic session guided by someone referred by a friend. It turned out, too late I might add, that this guy gave her the ick, as she put it. She described him as using a disgusting, creepy voice to say things like, "It's okay to moan," and Let it go. She spent much of the trip thinking, "Don't come near me, don't talk to me, don't touch me, don't even breathe on me." Which, of course, he did all those things. And as you can imagine, it wasn't conducive to slipping into a comfortable headspace where she could process what was coming to the surface in that state of mind. The moral here is to use common sense ahead of time and never feel pressured into anything. Do as much research on any facilitator as you can. See who they project themselves to be online, and watch any videos or read any material they have. Most importantly, sit down with them for a while, chat a bit, get to know each other, and see if there's a good vibe and chemistry between you, at least on Zoom or over the phone if you can't meet in person. You should have a pretty good sense after spending 30 minutes in someone's presence of whether there's the right chemistry between you. Maybe you click and it feels safe and comfortable immediately. Or maybe you give that person the ick and they don't want to facilitate you. That's okay. Find someone else who clicks. But never trip around someone you don't know or feel comfortable around under any circumstances, and you'll likely have a better experience. Regarding the role of the facilitator, it should be primarily limited to calling for help in case of an emergency, maybe offering a shoulder to cry on, or lending an ear to help process what you're going through, but only if summoned to do so. Anyone claiming to be a guide who is going to steer the ship in a major capacity is coming from a place of ego. The mushrooms are the guide here. They're driving the vehicle for as long as they have you under their spell. Fetching some tissues or another blanket, maybe assisting in changing the environment in some capacity is acceptable, but guiding the journey isn't in the cards. Say you find the perfect facilitator. Even having them in the same room might throw off your vibe. Having someone in the same general space but a room away, however, where you can just call out or ring a bell if you need support, might be more ideal. They shouldn't otherwise be interacting with you, and ideally, not distracting you with any sounds right outside your door or anything of that nature either. While I wouldn't necessarily recommend tripping alone the first time or two, moving through challenging situations on your own can be very powerful once you have a grip on how to navigate the psychedelic headspace. I knew there were places in my mind I needed to delve into that would never surface if someone else was around me, so I leaned towards solo journeys after I tripped alone for the first time. Having others present, even those you love and trust, can be a distraction or leave you feeling self-conscious at times. Having someone on call might be the least invasive form of support that provides a measure of comfort and confidence if you choose to trip alone. I've hit low points on a number of trips where I had to pull out my phone and go down the list, dialing any friend who would answer in that moment. I'd been saved from despair and comforted on those occasions as I talked through what was going on. It could always be a good idea to let a friend or two know ahead of time what you might be doing and ask if they might be available to be on call for you. All that said, I only started tripping alone once I was comfortable with the overall psychedelic experience and knew what to expect, to some degree anyway, as you never fully know what to expect going into these situations. The progression is something like riding a bicycle, where at first, friends are like training wheels. But if you want the true bike riding experience, you learn to ride without them. The first ride might be nerve-wracking, but at least for me, it's an essential step in self-exploration. Tip number 8. Timing and frequency. When should you trip, and how often? Good question. For starters, availability will play a role. You can't just pick up a bag of mushrooms at your local Walgreens, so depending on who you know and where you live, you might go days, weeks, months, or even years before an opportunity presents itself. Hopefully that changes, as we've seen with the legality and availability of marijuana evolve over the last few years, and more dispensaries or therapeutic facilities pop up as the taboo dissolves nationwide. But until then, refer to tip number 1. Assuming you have a reliable source, psychedelics aren't like caffeine, marijuana, or alcohol in the sense that you can or want to do them every day. These substances don't seem to have addictive properties, and a lot of times you'll come out of a trip feeling so physically, mentally, and spiritually exhausted that you think, I'm never doing that again. There even seems to be some kind of self-regulating mechanism built into the chemicals themselves, or perhaps it's the guidance of the spirit or entity you interact with that tells you when enough is enough. I can speak to the latter personally, as after a period of experimenting more often than was likely good for my mental health, the mushrooms told me I needed to stop. I was in a phase of life where I was, perhaps, addicted to healing, wanting to dig and uncover all of the trauma from my entire life to better myself. But I wasn't leaving enough time and space to truly integrate what I'd been unearthing. They essentially broke up with me for a year before I felt called to them again. A lot of how often you might be able to trip also has to do with your schedule. These aren't exactly 9-to-5 drugs, unless you work in Silicon Valley where microdosing is encouraged to support innovation. You can't just run to the local Starbucks and gobble down some mushrooms before heading back to work after lunch. That means planning out when to trip, as well as leaving time to integrate afterward. If you are a Monday through Friday 9-to-5er, tripping on a Friday night or a Saturday will give you the next day to process what you went through. The day after a trip is a crucial time to journal and reflect while the experience is still fresh, so it would be ideal to have some free time and be able to relax. Jumping right back into the morning commute and office work the morning after a trip might not be the most conducive transition back to reality. And if you've got kids or some other serious form of responsibility, that's a whole other layer of planning that needs to come into play. You'll also have to decide whether you want to trip during the day, at night, or experience some of both. During the daytime might seem like the obvious choice, as the visuals of the outside world will be illuminated by sunlight, but nighttime can have a more timeless quiet to it, as well as offer stimulating effects like stargazing or the sound of crickets. Not to mention, no one will be trying to reach you if you trip while everyone else is normally asleep. Whichever you choose, keep in mind that sunsets or sunrises can be absolutely spectacular under the influence of psychedelics. Tip number 9. Integration. Without integrating psychedelic lessons into your sober reality, a trip can become just another passing adventure. Simply consuming mushrooms doesn't always guarantee lasting changes. Rather, they often reveal what changes need to be made in your everyday life. The experience may allow you to access knowledge or new ways of thinking, but those insights and realizations can be fleeting or easily discounted if you don't write them down or take the time to reflect upon them. Integration is about investing in your revelations by actively applying them to your day-to-day life. This is a crucial step toward personal growth by making the most of every psychedelic journey. Keep in mind that you should respect the wisdom bestowed upon you by not rushing into another mystical experience. As Alan Watts put it, psychedelic drugs are simply instruments, like microscopes, telescopes, and telephones. The biologist does not sit with his eye permanently glued to the microscope. He goes away and works on what he has seen. The integration process after a psychedelic experience takes time and space. Your psychological, emotional, and physical recovery can vary after each experience. I can remember feeling so drained after some trips that it would take a day or two to bounce back to my normal sense of being. Other times, I would feel immediately lighter, as if gravity had let up for a couple of days. This all depended on the dosage, life circumstances, or what I had unearthed during the experience. Also, keep in mind that it doesn't all have to make sense immediately. I've had things come up 10 years ago that I'm still unpacking and figuring out how to apply to my life today. I've had intuitions about my future surface years ago that I'm still waiting to see come to fruition. Journal in the following days and weeks, then go back and read those journals later on and continue reflecting upon them. If you're having trouble mining lessons from your experience or making sense of certain visions, scour the internet to find others who have gone through similar situations. Talk to friends, psychedelic users or otherwise, to see if they can offer a perspective, or seek out an integration coach or therapist. There is also a group called Fireside Project that offers a free hotline to chat with people who have psychedelic experience and volunteer their time to help anyone sorting through psychedelic experiences. Communicating with others about your trips can help you gain more insight and derive more meaning. Tip number 10. Do your homework. I know. Gee, thanks, I picked up your book in hopes of learning and now you're sending me off on my own? But as Terence McKenna once said, the first stop on the psychedelic trip is the library. While these first 9 tips are a solid starting point, digging into articles, books, blogs, studies, videos, and podcasts on your own is always a good idea. While I hoped to provide a general foundation of insights, my experiences were particular to my own human journey. It's ideal to research the substance and scenario you plan to endure and prepare yourself as best you can. There is a fair amount of inaccurate information in circulation, as with anything, so it's important to dispel false ideas about these substances and find out what is true for yourself. You could do worse than starting with arrowid.org, likely one of the most comprehensive and reliable websites on psychoactive plants. It contains legal information, resource listings, photos of plants, and diagrams of psychoactive molecules. Perhaps most interestingly, it serves as an ongoing vault of anecdotal experiences written by different users, organized by type of substance used. How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan covers an in-depth history of psychedelic substances and the science behind them. Psilocybin Mushrooms, A Practical Guide to the Types and Magic Effects of Psychedelic Mushrooms by Liam Wolfe is an informative read. Psychedelic Memoirs by Anonymous details quite a few personal journeys. Dismantled by Bruce Sanguin contains applicable information on healing childhood trauma with psychedelics. Terence and Dennis McKenna are notable figures worth Googling to check out their numerous books and talks on the subject. Joe Rogan has many YouTube clips describing his own experiences and research, as well as interviews with other big names in the world of psychedelics. Andrew Huberman has at least one in-depth podcast that covers the science around psilocybin. There are also plenty of studies coming out of universities like Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, and many others. MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, is a 501c3 nonprofit research and educational organization that develops medical, legal, and cultural contexts for people to benefit from the careful use of psychedelics. They are an incredible resource of knowledge and an organization I believe can make a difference in the push for legality. Check them out at maps.org. Hopefully, this will get you started. But keep in mind that as much research as you do ahead of time, if this is your first experience, no words from someone else can fully describe what you'll go through. As I mentioned, I spent 2 years researching psychedelics before my first trip, and still lost touch with whether or not I was experiencing reality. Research, prepare, set yourself up for success, then let go of the steering wheel and go along for the ride. That's about the best advice I can give you. In closing, psychedelics might not be for everyone. Potentially dissociating from reality or giving up temporary control of your perception of the world isn't appealing to many, even if you are a healthy candidate for this type of experience. The effects, good or bad, can be lasting and influential. There are tales of people who come away worse off psychologically, at least in their minds, after having a psychedelic experience. And these cautionary stories should always be taken into consideration when thinking about trying this sort of thing. Furthermore, people who have an existing condition of, a predisposition to, or even a first-degree relative with psychotic or bipolar episodes are cautioned to avoid psychedelics, or at least it appears to be a rule-out condition in clinical studies for fear of triggering psychotic episodes. Also to be taken into consideration, or at least is done so within the clinical realm, is the age at which the brain finishes developing, around the mid-20s. Tampering with development using substances of any kind before completion is probably unwise, but psychedelics are particularly powerful substances that should be approached with caution and respect at any age. And finally, people taking antidepressants are advised, both within the clinical as well as more traditional ceremony settings, to avoid psychedelics altogether, or are advised to abstain from taking these types of medications in the weeks leading up to a psychedelic experience. Nothing in this book, of course, is intended to be any kind of medical advice whatsoever, and you should always consult with your physician or psychiatrist before attempting anything of the sort. I just share this to make you aware of what kinds of profiles may not be a good fit for the psychedelic journey. These cautionary words voiced, however, I would like to share that I've never had what I would consider a bad trip. Part of this might be luck, because I did put myself in a couple of situations that could have turned out poorly. I can see how someone might label a trip bad after ending up in jail, the hospital, deceased, or even by getting completely overwhelmed because they randomly took mushrooms at a bar or concert and had to deal with all sorts of overstimulation. But if you're smart and follow the guidelines above, you should be able to avoid those kinds of situations. A good deal of my own good fortune comes from implementing what I've outlined above. Even in the best of circumstances, you may find yourself in challenging situations, but this should not be considered a bad thing. I've gone through very frightening experiences, moments when I wanted to escape the hallucinations or turn the trip off altogether, even times when I thought I'd broken my brain and worried I would never be normal again. But once you're buckled in for the ride, there's no turning back. You simply have to go along for the remainder of the journey and keep in mind that the experience is temporary, and in 4 to 6 hours, you'll be back to baseline again. If you encounter something that is seemingly negative or frightening, the best thing to do is flow through it and face whatever it is you're afraid of. If you try to hide or run, it will chase you. Know that in the end, every difficult experience endured should turn out to be for the greater benefit of growth as a human being. If you find yourself in a difficult scenario, try to go through it with this question in mind. What am I supposed to learn here? Personally, I would never go back and change anything or wish experiences unfolded any other way. Perhaps one last bonus tip is that if you truly find yourself feeling stuck in a negative space and unable to figure out why, it might be advisable to seek out a change in your environment. Something as simple as stepping outside into the sunshine, putting on some music, or opening up a coloring book can help you shift your situation. Just keep in mind that what you're going through is temporary, and you will always come through tough experiences better for it, with lessons to be learned. I hope you enjoyed this guide and picked up a thing or two. These are the insights I wish I had before I started down my path, so I hope to pass along some utility in it for you. Wishing you the best along your psychedelic journey. This has been 10 Quick Tips for a Psilocybin Trip, a takeoff, landing, and integration guide by Kyle Woodruff. Read for you by Dallin Bradford.